all of you for joining the webinar. We were quite impressed to see the number of people registering, and not only impressed but also very motivated, because that shows that there is an interest for the discussions on human rights of older people, and that we really can do and want to really do more to keep the conversation going with you all, with the members, because you are our reason to be. So it's for us essential that you are active in the process, but we also know that for that it's important to give you some, let's say, background information on what's going on at United Nations level and how we think you can contribute to the discussions. This may seem abstract for some of you. This may seem very bit far from the ground, but actually the discussions taking place at United Nations, we feed these discussions with examples from the real everyday world and everyday obstacles that all people face in enjoying their human rights. And the new potential international instrument should have an impact on the ground, as other instruments like the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities is already showing very clearly. So it's great to see your interest, and really hope that after this webinar you will have some better knowledge of what's going on at United Nations, and that you will also feel, let's say, motivated to keep the conversation going also within your own membership, with your own members, and within your own organizations. So without any further delay, I will now give the floor to Nena, who will be giving an overview on the human rights of older persons and the process going on at United Nations level. Nena, I give you the floor.
Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me well.
I can. I hope the others as well.
If not, just write on the chat or complain, or I'll try to figure it out. So big hello from my side as well, and thank you for joining this webinar. So what we want to do, as Borja said, is to give you a kind of broad overview of what is happening in the UN, in particular in the open-ended working group on aging, and this discussion on a potential new UN Convention on the Rights of Older People, with the aim to allow you to become more directly involved, if you wish to, and also to contribute better to the work that we do as Age Platform Europe in this context. So before I start, just a very brief, let's say, definition about what is a convention, a UN convention, so that we are all at the same level. So conventions are agreements, international agreements that are signed by states voluntarily. So states decide to join these agreements, and when they do so, they agree to comply with the content of these conventions. And by doing so, they have not only to refrain from action that would be in contradiction with this convention, but also often to take positive action. So the United Nations have adopted conventions, and we call the conventions, or as well treaties or covenants. These are words that you might be hearing when you are talking about the human rights instruments at the UN level and beyond. So there are already several binding conventions, because conventions are binding treaties, so they have also some enforcement mechanisms, although often they are weak. And the UN has a general human rights instruments, for example, the Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, and the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, that are targeting everyone, regardless of age, sexual orientation, religion, disability, gender, etc. But they have also adopted some specific conventions targeting, for instance, children, women, and persons with disabilities. And now there's this whole discussion on the rights of older people. And although we may think that the discussion on older people's rights is new, and let me just make sure that you can see the presentation as it moves forward. Okay. In reality, this discussion on a dedicated instrument on the rights of older people goes a long way far. I hope you can see the presentation as it's changed so far. Borja, is it okay?
Yes, I can see it well. Okay. If anyone has a problem, please write it in the chat and we will help you.
Okay, if not, just let me know. So already 1948, which was actually the year that the United Nations adopted the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, which, as you know, is the most important and the most widely referenced human rights document in the world. So in the same year the United Nations adopted this declaration, Argentina submitted a proposal to the United Nations for adopting a declaration on old age rights. Now, this was not followed through, but it signaled already that there was an interest in the rights of older people, and that there was some understanding that they were probably left behind, and they needed some reaffirmation of the rights that they have on an equal basis with everyone else. Now, although this didn't follow through, in the 1960s, when the United Nations were discussing and negotiating the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, which is one of the key instruments of the United Nations, there was a proposal to include in that instrument a specific article, a provision on the rights of older persons. But this, again, was rejected, on the account that in the future we might have a dedicated convention on the rights of older persons. And later, there's a problem. Okay. Now, in 1991, you know that the United Nations adopted the UN principles on older persons, which include independence, participation, care, self-fulfillment, and dignity. And this was largely based on a proposal made by the International Federation on Aging on the rights and responsibilities of older people. So although the UN principles do not necessarily have, a rights perspective, the initial idea from NGOs was to have a human rights instrument. And the same call was made during the World Assembly on Aging in Madrid, and which gave the rise to the adoption of the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging, MIPA, where NGOs, again, they reiterated their call for a dedicated instrument. So these are just some key moments. There are a lot more. But all this actually gained an important momentum in 2007, because in 2007, Latin American states, as they were implementing the MIPA at the regional level, they understood that MIPA was not enough. And for the first time in history, a large group of member states, they called on the UN members, on the UN General Assembly and the Secretary General to start drafting a convention on the rights of older people. They did that in 2007 when they adopted the Brazilian Declaration, which made this call explicit. And since then, we have seen an increasing interest in the rights of older people and in the potential added value of a new UN convention in the UN system. And one of these key moments then was in 2009, when there was an expert group meeting on the rights of older people, the first of its kind. And this expert group meeting fed into a report by the Secretary General on the same year, which also recommended a new UN Convention on the Rights of Older People as a way to strengthen the protection of older people's rights globally. And as a result of all these developments, in 2010, the UN General Assembly adopted the resolution through which it established what we know as the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging. And the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging is the first UN process. It's a forum of member states, of NGOs, of national human rights institutes, and of UN agencies like the WHO, the International Labour Organization, and others. And it is the first UN process that is specifically focusing on the rights of older people. So the two World Assemblies that we had in the past, in 1982 and 2002, and the Commission on Social Development have been largely focusing on aging issues more from the societal development point of view, so in terms of economic and social development, whereas this group is really looking into individual aging, individual older persons in particular, how to promote and fulfill those rights. And the Open-Ended Working Group does not have a mandate to start drafting a convention, but it does have a mandate to look into all the possible ways, including a convention, that might help effectively protect the rights of older people across the world. And since 2010, there was more and more attention within the different UN mechanisms on human rights, independent experts, special procedures. There were several reports on the rights of older people. And importantly, in 2014, the Human Rights Council decided to appoint for the first time an independent expert on the rights of older persons. Now, this independent expert, who is Ms. Rosa Confalmante, she has the mandate to go into different countries, to look into the situation of older people on the ground, to talk with different stakeholders. And in particular, she was asked to look into how far NIPA has been as a sufficient framework to make a change on the rights of older people on the ground. And in her findings, Ms. Confalmante found that although MIPA and national laws and regional policies, etc., have been helpful in several ways, they did not manage to address the full spectrum of the rights of older people. This is why she suggested in her report in 2016 to member states to consider adopting an additional binding instrument, a convention on the rights of older persons. And now, at the same time, we saw also not only discussions happening at the UN level, but also regional organizations being interested in adopting specific instruments on the rights of older people. So we have already in the Organization of American States, and particularly followed by Latin American states, a convention on the rights of older persons and binding instruments. And there is also a binding instrument within the African Union. Now in Europe, we don't have yet a binding instrument, but the Council of Europe has adopted already in 2014 the first ever European instrument that is focusing specifically on the rights of older persons. And last year, the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe also adopted the recommendation on older people's rights and their comprehensive care. And in that, they also suggest adopting a new binding instrument on the rights of older persons. So we saw how the discussions have been developed, and also that this idea of a new convention is not novel. So what have we been discussing all those years, especially in the frame of the open-ended working? And this, of course, is just a snapshot. Now, the starting point for this discussion, of course, is that older people have the same rights as everyone else. However, older people face a distinct challenge. And this distinct challenge compared to other age group, other population groups, is that they face ageism in their everyday lives. And this is the root cause of many of the human rights violations in old age, from not having access to sufficient income, from elder abuse, discrimination in healthcare, in access to services, etc. The problem is that the existing human rights system has paid very limited attention to all these barriers faced by older persons. And states, although they have an obligation to report about the situation of everyone in their country and all the efforts that they're doing to protect the rights of all their citizens, in reality, they pay very little attention, and they report very little specifically about older people's situation when they report to human rights bodies at the UN level. And also, there is a lack of understanding about how to apply general rights that we all have, like the right to work, the right to education, the right to health, in the specific context of older persons. So we have mandatory retirement ages, which for some countries are considered acceptable, whereas in others it don't. We have age limits in access to training, we have age limits in health services, etc., and etc. And so what we see is that the laws and policies that we have not managed to make equally effective the rights that we all have, to make them equally effective for older people. And so this is where we are now at the discussions. So member states agree that there are gaps and there are problems in the protection of older people, but they do not necessarily agree that we should have a convention in order to address these problems. We have nevertheless, in the past years, seen an increasing number of states engaging with the UN Open-Ended Working Group and being more and more in favor of a convention. The idea of a convention is largely pushed by Latin American states, but also a lot of other countries have been supportive as well. European countries, in their majority, are not in favor of a new convention. That doesn't mean that they're opposed, but they are not yet convinced. That's what they say. We're not yet convinced that this is really, really necessary at this point. There's one exception, and this is Slovenia, but we see more and more lately, in particular Germany and Austria, being very constructively engaged and open and helping to have a discussion at the European level. Now, what are some of the arguments? And here again, I'm really simplifying. The arguments of those that are in favor is that there are gaps. In particular, we don't have a clear prohibition of age discrimination in international law. This means that older people, if they want to go and claim their rights under one of these under these international instruments, they cannot. So if they want to go to the committees that monitor the implementation of economic, social, and cultural rights, for instance, they have to prove that they have a right under these treaties, because this is not explicitly mentioned there. And as I mentioned, we have also a lot of justified age limits and discriminations in national laws, because there is no system through which we can say whether something is actually discriminatory or not. So there are diverging ways in which we understand the right to non-discrimination of the basis of one's age. Also, there is no explicit right to accessing long-term care. And there is no definition of elder abuse. So as a result, some member states might have, for example, laws to prohibit elder abuse in an institutional setting, but not in the community or at home. Or others just might see elder abuse in the context of domestic violence, but not more generally in residential settings. These are just some of the examples. And then, of course, the convention would help us create norms and to provide guidance for member states about what exactly they are supposed to be doing to make sure that older people have the same and equal rights with everyone else. It would create positive obligations for member states to take specific actions and measures, including to collect data, to monitor the situation of older people in the country, to make sure that older people are involved in decision-making, to factor more general older people in all policies that they build, but also in budgets and in resource allocation, which is not necessarily what is happening in most countries today. And of course, a convention would be a very important awareness and education tool. It would empower older people to know their rights, to claim their rights. It would create a positive image of older people. It would recognize the contributions of older people in society. It would educate the culture of respect of the older population. And it would be an important tool for advocacy on the rights of older people. Now, others, of course, say we have the same, everyone has the same rights, so we don't need a specific dedicated instrument on the rights of older people. And we in particular have some soft instruments, like the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging, so a new convention would be duplicating that. Also, some say, okay, we have so many conventions, the system is overburdened, we already have to make too many reports, so we don't need anything else, and do the conventions really make any difference? And in particular, conventions, the negotiation process and the application, once the convention is adopted, takes time and resources. And this is particularly important for older people due to their growing numbers. If we were to give older persons a right to long-term care, this would certainly have some resource implication. And there's a practical issue as well. How do we define older persons as a group, since they have so many heterogeneous experiences? Now, I think that there's, I don't want to open Pandora's box here. This is not the let's say, the objective of this webinar, whether we're in favor against a convention. AGE has said that we feel that the convention would help promote older people's rights, but there might be valid arguments from some countries and some NGOs against. But I think that what is crucial at this point for this webinar is to know what is missing from all these discussions. And what is missing from these discussions is older people's voice. So at the United Nations, we do not have the resources to bring older people to give their own views and to share their experiences. The Open-Ended Working Group does not have these resources. NGOs do not have the money to travel all the way to New York. And member states did not make any efforts to really include older people in their national delegations. So this is why we feel it is particularly important that you have an opportunity as national organizations to contribute to this debate. And you can do this in two ways. First is by submitting perhaps 3 written contributions to the discussions that are happening at the United Nations. So AGE, of course, is always taking into account the views of its members, and we try to integrate as much as possible what you tell us in your contributions, and when we meet and on different occasions that we gather views from our members. But in this context, contributions have to be very short. So what AGE does is we give the general trends that are happening in the region, the European region, in the European Union. So we cannot necessarily reflect the specific problems and older people in each country. So this is where it becomes particularly important for you and your organizations to also give the more specific point of view of older people within the country that you live and work in. And this is important because the Secretary of the United Nations are preparing a report on the basis of this written contribution. So whatever you send to the UN becomes part of the deliberations, part of the discussion, and it informs the decisions that are taken by the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging. So they are not at all lost. It's really, really important at this point that you have those experiences reflected in written submissions. And the second thing that you can do, in addition to written contributions directly and also through age, is that you try and to get hold of your national governments. Your national governments may not consult you when they before they go to UN, or they might not go to the Open-Ended Working Group at all, but you can go to them and you can tell them why this is important for you, what you feel are the challenges of older people in your country. And this is particularly important in this point, because and this is where I move to what we will be discussing in the rest of this webinar, because although I told you that the Open-Ended Working Group does not have a mandate to start drafting a convention, this is not yet its full mandate. A compromise has been found between those that are in favor and against the convention in saying, okay, we did not agree that we need a convention, but we can always see and discuss what might be the content of this convention. And once we know what the content of the convention might be, then we see if there's an added value in such a new instrument. So since last year, the discussion has slightly shifted, and we started looking into potential elements that could become the object of a new treaty. And this year we have the next session in July. We're preparing for this already. And we will be working in two ways. So last year, the discussion focused on the challenges of older people in terms of equality, non-discrimination, abuse, violence, and neglect. And based on this discussion, we are now moving towards putting those challenges into specific, let's say, legal language that could appear in a new treaty. This is what we call the normative content of these rights. So I will get back to that as well towards the end of this webinar. So this is one of the exercises that we're doing in preparation of the next Open-Ended Working Group on Aging. And of course, we need your feedback on how we frame those very, very important rights. The second thing that we are doing, and where we need your input for this Open-Ended Working Group session in July, is that we will be focusing on the topics of autonomy and independence and long-term and palliative care. And we will be looking again on the experiences of older people. What are some of their challenges in terms of autonomy, independence, and long-term and palliative care? And what are their countries doing to address this challenge? Are they doing enough? What is missing? And what could be then addressed in a new UN convention? So this is kind of gives you, I think, the general landscape in which we are working. We can have some time, a couple of minutes for you to ask some questions around this general framework before we move into discussing more the two issues, autonomy, independence, and long-term and palliative care. So thank you from my side.
Yeah, thank you, Nina. Thank you. I think it was a great overview of the process, but maybe any of the participants have any questions that we can now answer. So if you have any questions, you can unmute yourselves directly. You can activate your microphones, or you can write a message in the chat, and we can read out your question. So feel completely free. Don't be afraid. Yes.
Iran, hello.
Hello.
Hey, this is just now a kind of a practical question.
Mm-hmm.
Will we get a kind of summary of notes about actions we should take following this webinar?
Well, that's something we didn't discuss with Nina, but it could be a great idea actually to have a follow-up like that, explaining clearly.
I'm obviously, I'm obviously taking notes now, but just some kind of next steps would be really, really helpful, because then I could forward them to other people as well.
Sure.
Absolutely. Okay. Thanks. I think it's a great idea. What I didn't mention in my presentation is that we have already sent a call to age members and task forces to send us input on these themes. We realized that actually it was perhaps difficult for some of our members not to contribute without having this general background. This is why we decided to do this webinar. So what we will do, yes, thanks for reminding, is that we will first, for sure, get back to you about what we have already asked, but perhaps more specifically based on the discussions that we're going to have today, and also perhaps give you some indications about general next steps in this debate that might be helpful in building your, internal work at the national level. So we can definitely do that.
Mm-hmm. Sure, and we will also explain clearly what are the deadlines, because we need to submit written contributions for the themes that will be discussed this year: autonomy and independence, not palliative care. Submission is for April, so time is not huge, but we still have some time to give you in case you want to send us any input in writing. So we will explain that also in this follow-up email. We will share it with all people who registered for the webinar, first of all, and then we will consider also maybe disseminating it to also other H members and task force members. We'll have to discuss that with Nena. It's important for us not to try to not overwhelm you too much with emails, because we know that you already received so many emails from H, but this is clearly something very important. And to ensure the follow-up, we will send that email. Thank you for the idea, Karen. Any other questions or comments or remarks? Feel completely free. Even if you feel it's a very basic or introductory or whatever question, feel completely free to ask it.
I think.
Yeah.
I think Peter is trying to say something. Have you?
Peter, Yes, let me activate your microphone if I can, Peter. Oh, I can't. Yeah, you are self-muted, Peter.
I'm muted now.
Yeah, now we can hear you very well.
Anyway, all I wanted to say was, whilst I've made some notes, it would be helpful if Nina's PowerPoint, or call it what you like, the slides we've been looking at as Nina talks, they would be helpful to me to write my own précis for the organizations I want to brief.
Sure, and that's something we will definitely share.
Will we get the sort of PowerPoint that Nina has just gone through to assist us afterwards? Will you be issuing that, or will I have to rely on my notes when the webinar is over?
We can, I think now we have no problem to share your slides, right?
There is no problem at all, and I can also send you some additional material that might complement some of the topics I talked about, in case you need some.
They will be better than my notes, Nina. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay.
And also, as I explained at the beginning, we are recording this session, so you can watch it again, and you can send. I have to see what the format of the video is, but I will try to make it shareable so that you can share it with other people in your organizations. So this all is being recorded, in case that can also help.
You overestimate the technical skills of the old.
Well, I mean, my technical skills are often not as good as those of many other people. So really, maybe Laura, I think you activated your microphone. Do you have any comments? No.
Yes.
Yeah, Laura.
I'm not sure if it's not so much a question, but a remark. In March, the All the Women's Network will have a meeting with the director of the human rights body in the Netherlands. And I think because earlier you mentioned that we should approach our national governments, which is, we did that, of course, in these last years, but it's very difficult to get an entrance and to really get a discussion going on that level, being a very small NGO, a small network. Mm-hmm. But I think the human rights body could become a very important partner for us to cooperate on these issues of age discrimination and ageism, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So how is that in other countries? And do you have, I mean, are the human rights bodies in other European countries involved?
Nina, maybe you have more information on that.
Yeah. Thanks. Actually, this is a great point, Laura. Thanks for mentioning this. Something I will definitely put in the notes. Collaborating with national human rights institutions and bodies in your country is crucial, because I think you have a complementary expertise. You come really from the experience of older people's lives, and they come really from the human rights expertise, and it can really help you frame the issues around the challenge that all people face in human rights language and make it relevant for this debate. So this is an excellent approach. There are more and more national human rights bodies at the European level that are working on this topic, thanks to also to a lot of coordination done by the European network of national human rights bodies. And there is also a position by the regional organization in favor of a convention on the rights of older persons, and they have also coordinated a project on older people's rights, in particular in long-term care. So I think that the majority of national human rights institutions, they will be at least familiar with this debate and with the rights of older people. Many have done work, for example, in Poland, in Germany, in Slovakia. I think in some countries they have done work, but even others that have not done specific work on the rights of older people, they should be already familiar with the debate. So what we can do, and I know, for example, Laura, that in Germany, BACSO and the National Human Rights Institute are working together, and they are together with holding meetings with their government, and they're really preparing collaboratively for the open-ended working. This is like a gold star example. Even though you cannot, I'm sure that most countries this is not the case. In Germany, as I said, is one of the countries that is very actively engaged in the open-ended working group. But just doing work at the national level among civil society, and then approaching also the government level, it can really help, I think, as well. So what we can do is definitely provide also some of the contacts and examples of work that has been done also by national human rights bodies on the rights of older persons that can help you in that regard.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I just shared in the chat a list of European national human rights institutions, so that you can have a look at the institution in your country, which I'm sure you actually all know. But there you have a list of the kind of organizations we are referring to. So just for those of you who want to have a look. Okay. Maybe, well, I also wanted to add that other age members are also being quite active at the national level. We got news from the Slovenian representative in the Council of Administration that they are organizing a discussion with the government to prepare the next session of the open-ended working group. So Slovenia is, as Nena explained, one of the leading country, let's say, in these discussions from Europe. So it's probably easier for them, but it's certainly worth trying to establish such a conversation with national human rights bodies or also national governments. Okay. Okay. Is there any other question? Otherwise, we will move forward to discussing the elements of the rights for the next discussion, for the next session of the open working group. Okay. I think now we can go ahead.
Okay, so the objective of this part of the discussion is we will not have, unfortunately, the time, I think, to start, a reflection, to gather everybody's input to this topic. It's more to give you, again, some of the elements that might help you start some discussions at the national level, and then contribute to a more, let's say, comprehensive answer that you can give to the questions for the open-ended working group, either directly as a national member organization or via age, or both. And that would be ideal, I think. So to help you prepare in that regard, we thought we should give you a little bit of let's say, the understanding of these rights from more of a, both normative perspective, so what's happening in the human rights framework, but also the reality of older people's lives and how these two can be brought together. So in terms of autonomy and independence, what is autonomy and independence? These, of course, are two issues that are very closely interlinked, and they cannot exist, I think, one without the other. So autonomy is, in principle, the ability to make free choices about one's life. And independence is the ability to put those choices into practice and into actions of daily living, so that everyone is able to live a life according to their wills and their preferences. This is, let's say, the conceptual framework of this rights. Now, why is autonomy and independence particularly important for older persons? It is particularly important because we sometimes tend to think that just because someone is old, they should not be able to, or they cannot, or they should not be able to decide for themselves. So we tend to either neglect their opinion, decide for themselves, and not ask them for their opinion, etc. and etc. Or in some cases, we might assume that, okay, older persons, for example, they have a high interest in some parts of their life, like, healthcare, long-term care, and this kind of thing. But we don't necessarily think that older people have an interest in other areas of their life, such as, participation in community and in society. So we don't facilitate and we do not support them in making those decisions. And what does that means in terms of rights? I think that there are two main elements in this rights. First is the right to legal capacity, and then there is the right to support in order to allow someone to exercise their autonomy and independence. So legal capacity is the ability that every older person should have on an equal basis with others to make choices. So not to be considered unable to make those choices under law, but also in practice. And then they should also be enabled, and then I will get back to that, to make those choices with practical support, with a range of choices, and not limiting their choices or practically forcing them in one way or another in order to be able to live autonomously and with independence. And of course, this right should cover all areas of older people's life, just like for everyone else. It's not just about making informed decisions in terms of access in healthcare, for instance, but it's about your personal lives, leisure, financing, family life, intimate relationships, participation in society, everything that affects everyone's lives. And it is particularly important to note in this context older people's right to decide where and with whom they live. So often older people might have to make choices in this regard because there are not available options for them. So imagine a person who has high support needs, but wants to remain at home, but there is no, they either don't have a family, the family cannot support for them, or their needs are so high that there are no services available for them at home. So then this person is forced, despite their own wills and preferences, to go into a residential setting. That is one of the challenges that older people face. But on the contrary, there might be people that might prefer to be living more in a shared setting with others because they feel isolated in their own house and in the community, and they do not have either the resources or the opportunities, the range of choices available for them in terms of services to be able to make that choice. Also, sometimes whether you are in a community living at home or you're in a residential setting, you might not be able to make small choices about your life, be it what you eat, what you wear, when time you go to bed, who visits you, etc. and etc. So it is both about deciding where and with whom you live, but also how you live your everyday life, and to have all the range of support and services available to you, and also the ability and the support to help you make those choices. So what does this mean in terms of obligations of states and actions that needs to be taken by the state? It means the recognition that older people have the equal legal capacity on an equal basis with everyone else. So do not assume that just because someone is old, they are not able or should not be able to make their own choices, and also to support them to exercise their legal capacity and to communicate this decision, because in some cases people might be able to, might know what they want, but they not be able or afraid to communicate these decisions. And they can do this either by designating one or more trusted persons, help them practically with supportive decision making, allow older people to make advanced directives that can be used when they are no longer able to communicate their wills and preferences, to have systems of safeguards to prevent abuse and to prevent undue influence on the decisions made by older persons, and of course to have systems of redress so older people can challenge situations where others have taken decisions on behalf of them. And then the last bit is also about state obligations to provide, what I said before, a range of support services that allow effectively older people to decide where, with whom they live, to prevent isolation from the community and to effectively be living independently. And this is particularly important because in some cases you might be living in your own homes, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're able to leave your homes and to be able to interact with others and to have access to the services and the facilities that the general population has. So, and autonomy independence is not just about specialized measures for older persons so that they are able to make those choices, not about specialized only services for older people, but it's also about making accessible services like, the post office, transport, healthcare, shops, everything that the general population has access to. It should be available to older persons so that they're able to live their lives as they wish and independently as possible. So it is in this context that we are discussing these rights, and this is both in terms of what are the challenges, the particularities of older people's experiences, and what states can do to help older people enjoy those rights. So for the means that I think that we have here, and we will definitely get back to you with a full list of questions that the open-ended working group has called member states and NGO to provide answers to. But just for the sake of this discussion, to tease out these issues, I thought we can start thinking and reflecting on, what do you think are the key issues of older persons in your country, and what states should do to ensure older persons' enjoyment of the right to autonomy and independence. And this is, I think, what you need to keep in mind when you answer the questions from the open-ended working group. Sometimes can feel technical because they refer to laws and all that, but I think that your particular experience is what is most important. What do you think are the key issues, and what do you think that states can do to help older people address these issues? So if you have any thoughts on that or any questions about what I've mentioned, please let me know.
And I would even add, that if any of you wish to contribute to the discussions but feel that the questions are indeed too technical, if you send any other kind of input that is not necessarily answering to the questions that we are sending, it's also good, because that information will be helpful for us to then build our response to the questions that the UN is asking us to respond to. So anything you want to share in writing with us, it's really useful, and we will do then the work of disaggregating or taking from there the information to respond to the questions we got from the United Nations. So yeah, I think, as I explained, now we can maybe, if you want, you can give your thoughts about these two questions, or if you have any other comments, go ahead. No one for the moment.
That's fine. I think it's too much. Then just to say that the key point here is, and what I can do is I can send you, again, I don't want to overburden you, but if you feel you do not have the background information that you need to answer the questions or to understand why we're having these discussions on the right to autonomy and independence, then please always get back to us. I will put these links to these documents in the notes from this webinar. So for those of you that want to have more access to this information, please, you will be able to do that. So, but just know that what is especially important, as Borja said, for you to know, is not necessarily for you to answer all the questions. There are not many questions, actually, there are 4 or 5, but they ask the specificities about laws, etc. So even if you're not familiar about that, what we want is your experience and what you feel, what you're practically calling for at the national level to happen, and then we will be able also to translate that into what could be framed. These issues could be framed in an international context. So don't be afraid about making this translation yourself. We can help you do that. But if you need any more information about these issues or these rights and how you can have this discussion at the national level, do not hesitate to get back to us.
Could I just make a comment, Nana and Borja? I think one of the key issues still is this lack of a human rights culture within older people's, within like groups of older people. I think there's still a sense of feeling we should be grateful for what we have, rather than feeling that these are our basic and essential human rights that are being addressed or not being addressed at times.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think this is definitely true, at least for some parts of older people's organizations. I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding also about what rights are. They are often considered as entitlements and benefits, whereas we do not necessarily. Human rights are just rights that everyone has, regardless of age, just by virtue of being human. And I think the other problem with that is that often older people's rights are seen from the perspective of economic, social, and cultural rights, which are often this kind of entitlements, pensions and things that often older people have access to, and other members of the population might not have to, and we feel that they might be creating conflicts between generation and what happens if we give more pensions to older persons, who pays for them and all that. But this is why I think we need to have this discussion not only from the perspective of what kind of services and what kind of benefits we need to give older persons, but it is important to look to them as rights, and especially in this context from autonomy independence, because these are wider issues that are not just for older persons. These are issues that, regardless of age and regardless of the services that should or should not be available, this should be the guiding principles for the services we are creating. So this is, I think, the most important aspect of this debate. It's not about, I don't think, a convention or even the discourse on human rights of older people will solve by itself all the problems on the ground. We will still need a lot of work to put this into effect. But I think the main issue here is we change the culture. All of a sudden, we do not assume that just because you're older and just because we have very limited resources, you should be restrained in your home. And I'm sorry, that's it. No, older people, just like everyone else, just like you wouldn't accept it for yourself and for your kids, you should not accept it for an older person. So this is, I think, the importance of the discussion that we're having. But my question to you, Kieran, is how do you think that we can help change that culture, and how we can support you in the work that you might be doing at the national level on this topic? If there's any ideas, please, we're more than happy to support.
Can I say something about that, Nina?
Yes, of course.
Well, I fully agree with the earlier remark, the comment about this lack of culture. And I think when I consider all the different European projects we are involved in, funded by Erasmus+, a very important part of the project is raising awareness. So there's something that before you talk about rights, I think basically you're trying to raise awareness about the issue, which is not easy, and on all levels, not just it's among all the people themselves, but also organizations in the care, social care sector, local authorities. So that's a very long-term process, but it does help if you're involved as an NGO in projects and you organize meetings, etc., and even on a very how shall I put it, a low threshold, like we're doing here in the town where I live, to have a sort of living room meetings, and I have them in my own house. So invite people from the neighborhood, older people, and then have a conversation simply about what they think and how they feel about living in this neighborhood and the worries they have, etc. So it's basically giving people a voice and facilitating that, making possible that they can meet and that they can have a conversation about the issues that are important to them, and also raising awareness among the care organizations, etc. So that's basically what I wanted to say. So instead of talking about rights, there's something that precedes that.
I agree with you, Laura, but I think that they can happen at the same time. I think that when you invite those people to talk and to share their voice, you're empowering them if you're telling them that you have a right to share your story. You have a right to that, to X and to Z. I think this is the kind of culture shift that we need to be making within the organizations and the communities. And I do agree it's long term, but this is, for me, the biggest legacy of this process is not going to be the convention. It's going to be this change of perspective that we will hopefully be having within the aging sector and within policies and laws around aging and all that.
Yeah, I fully agree.
Can I say one thing, please? When we talk about older people as them, I'd much prefer to talk about older people as us. And I think the real problem that we face as older people is not being grouped together. Unfortunately, you have comfortably off older people and older people. And the difficulty is they're all older people. And we must prevent society from grouping them together. So I don't really go along with thems. I think it should be us when we're talking about older people.
Absolutely, and I think that in specifically in this context, it even goes. I mean, I do consider myself an older person in process, and I think that is why it is important to make this more of a universal societal issue, not just an issue for a specific generation, because this is where some of the misunderstanding about what rights and are we talking about. This is about really universal human rights that we all enjoy, and how that should not diminish for anyone when they become older. So for me, this is the perspective.
I think there was another person. I mean, there was some noise there.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, we cannot hear you very well. We hear a lot of echo. So we cannot see your name. Who are you?
Is it better now? I'm from Cyprus.
Cyprus. Okay, perfect. It's quite bad. It's if you can maybe put down a bit the volume of your speakers, could be better, I think.
Is this better? Is that better?
Well, slightly, but if you go ahead with your comment, and then we can mute you again. Yeah.
I'll try.
Okay. Yeah, it's a bit. There's a lot of echo. But go ahead with your comment.
In order to identify the key challenges.
It's not possible. We cannot hear you really well at all. Sorry. But maybe if you can write your question in the chat, then I can read it out. So if you can write it there in the chat, just click on chat, and then you can send your question or your comment, and I will read it out if that's possible, because otherwise the quality of the sound is really not good. Okay. Any other reaction to the discussions we're having? Francesca was supporting what Nina was saying, and she was saying that local and national authorities are responsible for the general ageist attitudes of professionals and citizens as a whole. So I guess there is an interplay between institutions, policies, and societal attitudes. What I also believe is that maybe in society there are ageist attitudes that are part of our culture that we have so much integrated in our thinking, in our behavior, that we do not even realize them. And that's one of the positive impacts that the convention could potentially have, is the fact that you change the way people look at other persons. And I think you challenge these ageist attitudes, if you want. And I think that the Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities is already changing a lot regarding the way all people with disabilities are seen. And now they are seen, I believe, more as rights holders than they were seen before the convention. So the convention is not a miracle, but clearly that it kind of sets the tune of a new paradigm, of a new, let's say, societal attitudes towards a group or so that would be also the value of a convention on the rights of other people. Okay, so Maria is writing maybe something. Yeah, okay, Maria, you take your time, write it. If you want to write a comment, do it, and we will read it out a bit later. Now I think we can move to, maybe, if you agree, now we can move to long-term care and palliative care.
Sure. Can I just say something?
Yes, Francesca.
One thing. Well, I'm among those who are not so sure that a convention is needed, because there are so many laws and regulations to follow already. But what I recognize is that, as I try to write down before in the chat room, but I'm not sure I made quite clear what I was willing to say, is that okay, although there are many legal instruments of protection of older people, I'm talking about Italy. We have a code of for the punishment of those who are committing crimes, and fragile people is already overprotected, or more protected than normal people. But what I'd like to say is that maybe the convention is needed when talking to the attention states and local authorities or national authorities are putting in providing instruments of for the care or assistance of older people. There is no sufficient attention put in the in protecting or in giving enough attention to fragile categories, and older people is a category among the fragile categories. And so basically they are quite well in providing rules of, how can I say, rules, sanitary rules, or social rules. So we need to give people the assistance they need in terms of domicile assistance or sanitary assistance, but they are not. It's something that put some distance between the care assistance and the people testing, the people accepting the care. I'm not sure I'm making myself clear enough, but I mean, the autonomy and independence sometimes are subsidized. I mean, they are not taken into account.
You mean in care services, in the way care services are organized?
In care services, though, both social and health services.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that we have the instruments, but no one cares to ask, do you want to have that or do that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's it.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm being quite. I am quite long in explaining, but it's sometimes difficult.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess that you mean that regulations are there that go in the sense of guaranteeing independence and autonomy of all people, including those who are in need of care, but that they are not respected or that they are not really enforced. That's if I understand.
They are. Yes, they are respected in most cases, but they are not. They are sometimes imposed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I am a person with care needs, and I don't want the care needs, or I feel that the needs I have are different from that I am obliged to have, or that's it.
Mm.
I mean, sometimes older people are not asked if they want to go in a care settings, but they are forced to enter a residential setting or are forced to accept provisions that they are not willing to have.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's one of the clear violations of the right to autonomy of all people if they cannot make a choice about the living arrangement and the type of care they will be receiving. Clearly,
yeah.
And quite a frequent one. Mm.
Yes, this is one of the biggest issues we are facing in Italy, at least.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's quite widespread. I was reading Maria's comment. She sent a written comment. In order to identify the challenges, should we distinguish the need of all people from disabled? Able people have different needs, as the need of work, training, education, etc. Okay. So if we should be distinguishing between all people and people with disabilities, well, I think that's Nena. You are the best place to respond to this question.
Thanks, Maria, for this. I think that's a very fair point, and indeed, I mean, some of the challenges about, especially what Borja will be discussing in a while, long-term care and all that. In principle, are people even we don't label them as people with disabilities, are people who might have some need for support. But when we talk also about autonomy and independence, although, definitely there will be distinct challenges, for example, for people with dementia or, for other mild cognitive issues, etc. I don't think that first, even that per se is a reason why we should afford these people less autonomy and independence. So this should definitely be part of the question. But at the same time, this is not the only reason why older people are denied the right to autonomy and independence. So we often see, for example, people that are completely mentally very well, that are being patronized. They are not given choices in their lives. They are not asked for their opinion, and so on. So while indeed there might be different challenges between the groups, in particular when we talk about people with disabilities, even the group in there is huge, and people with cognitive disabilities in particular might be facing some specific challenges and need more targeted support in exercising their autonomy and independence. But even people with disabilities in terms of with physical disabilities, although they might be challenged in other ways in terms of physical barriers and accessing healthcare and work, like you say, regardless of age, they might still have an additional barrier just because they're older, due to the prejudicial attitudes against the older people, when you might say, okay, you are older and you are disabled, or you are old and you're not disabled, but who cares about you and about your needs and about what you want and your wills and your preference. So while I think you're right, there might be distinct challenges, I think that also there are challenges that are very common across all older people, regardless of whether they are disabled or not. So this is definitely something that you could reflect on in your contribution. And if you feel that there's a different treatment, there's less facilitation or more facilitation for the two groups in your country, this is something, of course, that needs to be taken into account. But also sometimes younger people with disabilities might have more choices than older people with disabilities in terms of, how they live, where they live, if they have access to community care or not, if they have resources, etc., and etc. So these are all things that might feed into why older people are particularly disadvantaged in accessing the rights to autonomy and independence, whether they have disabilities or not. I hope this answers your question. I'm happy to discuss with you later on.
Great, thank you, Irena. I suggest we move forward to the other two topics that I will present quite briefly. I will now share my screen. There I go. I hope you can see it well. There I go. So quite quickly, the other two topics that will be discussed this year are the rights to long-term care and to palliative care. So I start here with a definition that comes from partly from the European Quality Framework for Long-Term Care Services, the WEDO Quality Framework, which many of you know. So a right to long-term care could be defined as, in a way, the right to access services that encompass prevention, rehabilitation, enablement, cure and care, that they include also end-of-life care, and that they combine health and social care. And here is where I kind of slightly modified the definition in order to include the reflections that we have had with the task forces and that we have been working on in the last years, is the fact that it's important that care is not seen as something passive. It's not about doing things for the person who cannot do them for him, herself anymore, and that's all. No, long-term care should be also about support and about assistance, and it should be also helping all people to actually keep the rights to autonomy and independence. So here you see that the right to long-term care is actually very much connected to the rights to autonomy and independence, because in our view, a comprehensive right to long-term care should include also services to support all people to remain autonomous and to remain independent, including living in the community and being part of the economic, social, civic, cultural life in their communities. Therefore, if I can change the slide, yeah. So some of the elements that can be part of the right to long-term care based on reflections we had in the past and also the inputs we have gathered for the moment from H members. Some of the elements that should be included in such a right are the fact that the care services that are available are continuous and that they are organized around the needs of the person without the use of any restraints, and that so that the dignity and autonomy and independence of all people receiving care is preserved in all moments. Also, that care is adopts, let's say, this approach of helping people receiving it to rehabilitate, to prevent further problems, and to improve the situation they are facing. So that services are not only compensating for losses, but that they are also empowering all people to regain as much as possible a better health status whenever that's possible. And also the issue of access. A right to long-term care should be also about guaranteeing the access to care services, meaning that care services should be unconditional and affordable for all. And a right to long-term care can also include the aspect I was mentioning before. So care also seen as support, meaning guaranteeing the autonomy and independence, supporting the autonomy and independence of all people receiving care, and guaranteeing their involvement in social life. So these are some of the elements that can be part of the right to long-term care, depending on further aspects, further elements that you may share with us before we submit our response to the United Nations in April. These are the questions we got from the United Nations. Don't be scared. I mean, it's lots of words, but I highlighted actually three of the three elements in these questions that we may want to now. I mean, I will open now the floor in case you want to address them. So, in your country, what types of support and services are covered? Which challenges face all people in accessing long-term care currently in your countries? because we know challenges are numerous, but which challenges you see in your own countries when all people need to access long-term care, and the measures that have been taken that are still needed to ensure the quality of care services. These are three questions that, in my opinion, are quite central. So I will now open the floor in case you have any comments around the topic. In case you want to give your any thoughts around these three questions I highlighted. Feel free to unmute yourselves and ask any questions, or you can also write them in the chat. Yes, Javier.
Hi, this is Javier. Thank you, Borja, for this opportunity. I have a question concerning question number 2, or even the title, questions on long-term care. Why long-term and not just care?
Mm-hmm. Well, the idea is that care for someone who's been losing autonomy, for someone who's been losing her independence to perform everyday activities, for someone who has a disability, or for someone who has a chronic health condition. By definition, all these conditions take place in the long term, so they take place for an extended period of time. So that's why we talk about long-term care, because care can also be something acute. When the person goes to a hospital, for example, and receives some care in the hospital, and the person then can completely rehabilitate. But when rehabilitation is not completely possible because there has been a loss of autonomy, or because there is a health condition that will be chronic, then we need to talk about care in the long term. That's the sense of the term.
Yeah, because when I hear long-term care, is always more related just to health, but we also need social care.
Of course. Yeah, you completely agree
that's why the long-term care is more related, because it's really more related to health. I think certain aspects are being lost.
Well, it is our aim to restate and to remind all the time that care should not be limited to healthcare, and that long-term care should not be limited to healthcare. That long-term care is let's say quite a wide, includes a wide diversity of services that are both healthcare and social care, and that they include also this support dimension that I was referring to, meaning the ability to get involved in the community, to remain active, to be able to participate, to keep your independence and your autonomy to the greatest possible extent. So indeed, there is this problem that long-term care has been seen in a medicalized way for too long time. But one of H's key messages that we consistently state is the fact that, the term itself is not problematic as long as you bear in mind that care, and that's something that I think is changing in mentalities, that care or long-term care, it should be also about social care and also about social participation and about remaining autonomous and independent.
Oh, okay.
More.
Okay, thank you.
It is true, though, thinking about it, Borja, that now they've said it, long-term care implies a medical condition, whereas care for all of us is what we're talking about. I think it's worth a debate as to whether the word long-term is indeed an appropriate word. I hadn't thought about it till now, but I shall do.
Yeah. What about the continuous care?
No, sorry.
Yeah.
Can I say something? Well,
Yeah,
I
sure.
was involved in the WIDO project, so I can say that long-term care was intended to be the complex of integrated health and social care. Is not meant to be seen as a healthcare and social care, but is a complex of integrated measure to assure the assisted, a complex of measures as to give the assisted the possibility to live a dignified and autonomous life as long as possible. That's it.
Yeah, and I think that's the way. So I understand the concerns about the language. I think that's the way in which long-term care is being understood also in, for example, European Union policy making, or it's the way it's been understood by the United Nations when they are asking us this question. I really believe that's not the biggest problem. I think there is an acknowledgement that long-term care includes both dimensions, the integration of health and social care. What I think we should be more, let's say, worried about is the fact that there is still quite a passive way of looking at care as something that is compensating for losses of autonomy, and not a type of service that is also empowering all people to enjoy their autonomy and independence, and to be involved in the community and to participate in the community. I think that's more of a challenge. I wouldn't say the challenge currently is that much the fact that it's, let's say, that we are limiting the definition to only healthcare, because I think in ongoing policy debates, I have the feeling that the social care dimension is included. But what we should be taking care about more, in my opinion, is about making sure that the social care dimension is also about participation in the community and getting involved in the community and breaking any kind of isolation that the old person may be experiencing. That's
Borja, just to add to that. I completely agree with you in the sense that at least within age, in the work that we do, it is very clear to us that when we talk about long-term care, we talk about all these aspects. So the comprehensive aspect of health and social care, and with this aspect of empoweredness that you mentioned, and integration in the community. However, I think that it is relevant to make this comment in the context of the human rights of all people. First, because if we are going to inscribe anything of all into a binding instrument, we need to be very careful about the language, because language matters in this in law, and also you have to take into account the cultural context in which this will be applied. So if in some contexts long-term care implies medical conditions, we might need to use another language that does not imply this. I know from the disability movement that they do not use the term long-term care or care at all. Long-term care for some people means solely institutional care, which might be, I'm not saying that this is the way that age interprets it, but I'm saying that for some people, some contexts, this might be the primary context that they understand when we talk about long-term care. Also, long-term care has been widely associated in some contexts only with older people as a distinct scheme, which is different from services and schemes and systems that are offered to other groups of society, like younger people with disabilities. So these are connotations that are important about the kind of, we were talking before about the paradigm shift and what kind of society we want to build. And just to throw one more thing, because I think that this is not the time or the place, but I think it's a very interesting discussion to start having within age. Within the disability movement, they have completely abandoned the word care. They do not talk about care anymore. I'm not saying this is what we should be doing. Please don't take, but just to talk a little bit about the reflection, because they feel that care might be something that perceived as more paternalistic, something that you kind of give to older persons, rather than this more empowering paradigm that they wanting to reflect. And this is why they talk about support. I understand that there might be negative aspects in support, because others might not interpret it as going as far as health and et cetera, et cetera. So both aspects are, they might have their positive and their negative, but I think that is a reflection that it is indeed worth having in the context of human rights, and even more as we try to define normative language about these rights. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the comment. I mean, I of course I completely acknowledge that indeed words are very, very important, and that they often can also create realities. And indeed, it is quite striking, but also I think I really admire the fact that in the disability movement, this choice was made to adopt this social model of disability, meaning that also, terms like care are being abandoned, and that you talk about support, and I think that's indeed quite an achievement, I think, from the side of the disability movement. So yeah, that's the discussion we can have. I was also thinking that we've been advocating for recognition of care as a right for all people, and we recently saw as an achievement the fact that the European Pillar of Social Rights, for example, which is not, of course, a human rights instrument at all, but well, it's quite let's say an important achievement in the field of social Europe, and well, long-term care is included as one of the rights with this term, long-term care as such. So that's a recognition that states have an obligation to provide these kind of services also to all people. So, but indeed, it's a discussion. I think now we will have it in at the Open Networking Group, also because the group is covering all the 5 continents. So it's I guess the term can have connotations that are different in different continents. So that will be quite a fascinating discussion, I think. Maybe because we don't have much time, in theory, only 4 minutes, we can maybe extend, for those of you who can stay a bit longer, we can maybe take 5 or 10 more minutes of your time. But let me move forward to the following topic of palliative care. So this is a definition that I took from its WHO definition on what palliative care means. So palliative care is the kind of care that improves the quality of life of people. I mean, patients is a term we would prefer not to use, but of people and families, people facing a life-threatening illness. So an illness that is putting their life at risk. And it includes the prevention and the relief of suffering, and the treatment of pain, and other, but not only physical pain, but also all kinds of psychosocial, spiritual, existential problems that may arise from the fact that the person is experiencing a life-threatening condition. Let me change the slide. Okay, so some of the elements that should be integrated in a right to palliative care should be, well, these are 3 that I wanted to highlight. The fact that all people should have access to palliative care on an equal basis with others, and regardless of the condition they are experiencing. For very long, palliative care was limited to people with cancer, and it was not really accessible for all people, or to people who had a different medical condition. So ensuring a right to palliative care means that it's accessible to anyone with a life-threatening condition, regardless of what this condition is and regardless of the age they have. Also, palliative care should be integrated across a spectrum of care services to older people in order to ensure the quality, the person-centeredness of the care, and to ensure also the continuity of the service. And the fact that palliative care should be accessible as soon as a need is detected, and alongside cure. So even if the person can potentially, there is a cure that can be provided to the person to end this health condition. As long as there is some suffering, palliative care can deliver together with the curative care at the same time. Here you go, some of the questions that were made by the United Nations, the 4 of them actually. I highlighted 2 of them that we may want to address now, or you may also make general comments, as it was the case for long-term care. So first, what are the specific needs and challenges facing all people regarding end-of-life care in general? And very importantly, is palliative care available to all older persons in your countries? Do you have any information about that? I give you the floor, or if you have any general comments or questions, go ahead, please. Let me say that we are currently involved in a project called PACE that is trying to improve the access of all people to palliative care, because this unequal, insufficient access of all people to palliative care has been detected, and the numbers are actually quite striking, that access to palliative care is really very, very low for other people. So there is lots of suffering that could be prevented if all people could enjoy a right to access palliative care on an equal basis with other age groups, and regardless of the health condition they are experiencing. Okay. No reactions.
One reaction, Borja.
Mm-hmm.
Palliative care quite often relies heavily upon charities and outside bodies, and less on the state, which is one of the problems. Most palliative care is given by people give money for palliative care. I'm not suggesting it's a good thing. I'm just making the comment that almost everywhere there is the charity world provides it. Certainly in the UK, Macmillan Homes and things like that rely almost entirely upon the goodwill of society, which is not necessarily right.
Okay, that's a great point. Thank you. And what we see also is that palliative care, I don't know how's the situation in the UK or other countries, but it is very much still associated to very, very, very end of life stages.
Yes.
So you would only access palliative care once you are really close to death. And a new approach to palliative care or ensuring a right to palliative care should be about ensuring access, and the state should have an obligation to provide access as soon as the need has been detected. As long as the suffering has been detected, that can be palliated. That's the logic of ensuring an access to palliative care. Whenever a medical care cannot cure, at least it's not 100% sure that medical care can be helpful, and the suffering is happening, then palliative care should be accessible. And indeed, it is about also states having the obligation to provide it. Laura, I think you activated your microphone.
Yes, but please continue.
No. If you want to ask a question or a comment.
Well, I just wanted to say that I mean, these are really complex debates in the Netherlands, as you may be aware of. Not so much the palliative care, also palliative care, but issues about self-determination, but also recently the issue of if people have the notion that their life is accomplished, and then there's a whole movement, they say then in this case you have the right to that your life can be ended with help, of course, of doctors, which is of course a very difficult discussion. It's only a small group that wants this, but the whole issue of if you have the sense that your life is accomplished, even if you don't have very even if you're quite healthy still. So that's of course a very complicated issue. And euthanasia and right to palliative care is a complex discussion in the Netherlands. So these are the questions that you ask are not so easy to answer, but I'll try to do that later on to give at least a little bit of idea in writing of what the issues are in the Netherlands.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. I know we know that this is a challenging topic. What I would also say is that it is not necessarily related. I mean, of course, it is very closely related to euthanasia or to assisted suicide or self-determination in close to death. And of course, these issues are very much connected, but we can deal with palliative care without necessarily entering in those other topics. And that's the way we are doing it in this European project PACE. I would also say that, for example, we got an invitation from, the Catholic Church was doing some reflections around palliative care, and a representative of age went there because, it was between different religions, a discussion between Protestants, Catholics, and Jews. Discussion was taking place about access to palliative care, and so in principle you could assume that these religions are not particularly favorable to euthanasia or to assisted suicide. Of course, they are completely against, but they have moved forward in recognizing that palliative care is a necessity and that the right to palliative care should be enforced, which shows how you can actually talk about palliative care without necessarily entering into discussing more widely other topics.
I fully understand that. I just wanted to say that this, of course you can, but I was merely stating that in the Netherlands, that's quite difficult because it's really a complex issue and related issues. So it's difficult to have just a discussion about palliative care without addressing the other ones.
Sure.
That's all.
Sure. And we see that in Flanders as well, in Belgium, that I think is in that respect a bit close to the Netherlands. And indeed, this discussion is very wide and very active, which is not the case everywhere in Europe. So I see what you mean.
Yeah.
So you can imagine how difficult it is in Italy.
Yes.
There is a national legislation. It's a national law number 38 of 2010 that talks about palliative associated to pain therapy. It is never mentioned the end of life care, but it's more associated with possibly transitive or temporary health conditions, and it states the right to access the palliative care and pain therapy to all citizens, regardless of age and whatever. There is a big discussion, of course, between in the field of palliative care, end of life, and assisted suicide. What we developed in Italy, and it's quite a good compromise, I guess, is in case of very, very serious health conditions like cancers, and there are no more that can be lead to a complete complete dismissal of the therapy. There is a deep sedation. The deep I don't know how to say, they deeply anesthetize people, preventing them from suffering, and until the final exitus of the health disease.
Okay, I see. I think that the message we are trying to convey within this European project base is the fact that palliative care should not be about only a temporary condition or about the very end of life, but could be delivered in an extended period of time, a couple of years, 3 years, 4 years, depending on the length of the life-threatening condition, because that's still an issue we see, that it's been very much restricted to a temporary issue or to a specific health conditions such as cancer, for example. So in fact, this targeting of the delivery of palliative care is discriminatory against all people. In a way.
No, in Italy it is not.
Okay.
Apparently, by law.
Okay, by law. Okay. Any other comments? Well, Nena, we still have a couple of points to deal with. So we needed to.
No
discuss.
worries, Borja. We'll do it fast. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Let's.
I mean. Unless you have any urgent issues, what I wanted to do just for the final part is just to explain how it will work, because so far we worked on the two themes that will be the main issues discussed in the next open-ended working group on aging, autonomy, independence, long-term and palliative care. And I mentioned in the beginning that there is a parallel work taking place as well. And this is to define normative elements, we call them, so specific language, so what could be included in terms of rights to non-discrimination and to freedom from violence abuse in the new instrument. And I don't think it makes sense to go through this right now, because mainly because you will not have the time to go through the contributions that have been made already in the open-ended working group last year to understand where this is based on. So I just wanted to tell you now that what we are going to do is that I'm going to share with you after this meeting a draft of these elements, that we have built with a group of experts, and bearing in mind what has been discussed on the open-ended working group, to give us their views. I think that this might be a helpful way, because you might not be sure about, what it means, right, put the right in language and so forth. And this way you will see what elements we have identified. You can tell us, give us your feedback. If you see something is missing, it's unclear, something needs to be strengthened, something is relevant, and so on. Just to give you the quick idea behind this that we have is first that non-discrimination on the basis of age should not be justified. So in the sense it should be prohibited on equal basis with all other forms of discrimination, and any exceptions that might exist to the rule, they should not go against the fundamental rights of older people, dignity, independence, and so on. So it is by saying that, what we want to say is that we do not want to water down the rights of older people just because we assume that age discrimination is more acceptable for older people than for other groups. This is the shift that we want to make, and we give the language to make the shift, and we explain what states should be doing to make the shift. Likewise, for elder abuse, this is the idea of the normative elements on elder abuse as well. We say that the elder abuse should never be justified. This is not the normal practice, and it should be prevented in every situations that it happens. And abuse includes also unintentional abuse, also neglect, and so on. And member states should take also, should not only refrain from abusing and neglecting and violating the rights of older people themselves, but to take measures so that they prevent others as well from abusing the rights of older people. So what I will do after this meeting is I will share with you these elements that we have kind of distilled from the discussions and from what exists already in human rights standards. And I would like to ask you to provide your feedback to this item. I think this is the easiest and the best way forward. That will give you the time to reflect, to think, and to understand where this is all coming from.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
I think that's for the last point. Okay,
great. So maybe to sum up, so we will send you an email with all the information you need to contribute to all these discussions. So there are, like, to make it clear, like 2 blocks. So one of them is the topics we presented and we discussed: autonomy and independence and long-term care and palliative care, which are new for this year. So for that, we have an online questionnaire that you can fill in, or you can also just send us any document where you can freely write whenever, whichever contribution you may have to share. So that's one thing. And the other is what Nena just explained. So the 2 elements that were discussed, the 2 rights that were discussed last year, meaning equality, non-discrimination, and freedom from elder abuse, that for which we have already this document, 3 pages with some elements that constitute these rights, and we will ask you for any reactions to this document that you may want to share. So these are the 2 big things that we are asking you to contribute with. As I said before, this has been recorded. We will also share the slides we presented so that you can have a look at them and share them as much as you wish. And we would be expecting you to provide any contributions, I would say by mid-March, something like that. But we will indicate a deadline in the email we are sending afterwards. So I think that's all, Nena. I don't know if you have any other comments.
Yeah.
That's all. Okay, great. So thanks so much for all of you for having participated. It took a bit longer than we announced, so thanks for staying. And we hope it was interesting. If you want to share any other feedbacks, comments, well, send us an email. We are always happy to read you. And we hope that this was stimulating for you and that, well, the presentation was clear. So thanks to all, and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.